How about this? 3 shows per week is back. Now, I know it looks like a brave face, but don't let the brave face fool you guys. I am moderately to severely shaken. I'm concerned, and I'm concerned because I think we did predictions too early. And I told Jesse this may happen, and we did it anyway. Now, I wake up this morning, and I'm not really sure of anything, to the point where I think I may need to adjust some things. I don't know if you've ever felt that before, but I feel it. Welcome in. We're jam-packed, high atop a comfortable low dew point downtown Nashville, Tennessee, Tuesday, August 20th, the year of our Lord 2024. 5 biggest Saturdays in the sport this year. We're leading the show with it tonight. Everyone knows about October 12th. Hopefully all of you know about October 12th. But that's not it. This is a college football season, so we like to spread it around throughout the entire year. Obviously, any Saturday is a big Saturday, but some bigger than others. Colin Cowherd had a little take a while back, as it turns out, on Oklahoma. But it mysteriously surfaced for many of us today. I had never heard it. I heard it today. Some asked, what do you think about it? I don't know that we've done many reactionary segments, but there was enough meat on the bone where I'm going to react to it tonight. How about that? A reaction segment. Courtney Morgan got a big-time raise at Alabama. That's the general manager there, and it kind of hit the reset button on the college football personnel industry in the process. Now, some of that doesn't concern you. A lot of it actually does concern you, and I'm just going to try to explain it. Also, team predictions, got a couple more tonight. We're going to do Tennessee. We're going to do Penn State. We've got bold predictions. We got all sorts of things going on. They're watching us in Sumner, Georgia, Bloomington, Indiana, Prescott, Arizona, Ames, Iowa. Thank you so much. I led the show tonight with concern. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you now. I was going to save this for later in the show. I'm redoing my predictions. Some of them are going to be the same, but there are some mistakes that I have made, I think, some minor corrections that need to be made. So circle your calendar, call your Meemaw, text your mom, whatever you need to do. Thursday night, sort of a prediction 2.0 around here. And the Constitution says as long as week 0 hasn't started, I can change my picks. This coming from the same guy, I think, who changed his predictions in week 6 last year. So really, it's nebulous at best. At Late Kick Josh, make sure you're following those socials. We've been slowly leaking things. Many of you have noticed. I haven't said a word about it. Like this little logo over my back here, that's new. I didn't say a word about it. But I promise you, there are some more things coming that I will soon be able to speak on that I can't speak on quite yet. Here's what I can't speak on. Let's dive into the show. Let me stack my papers. It's different than a paper pop. If you're new around here, anytime you hear that paper pop, that means business is coming. No, this was just paper stack. I got a lot to get to tonight. What are the 5 biggest Saturdays in college football this year? I don't think anyone who has glanced at their schedule can look past October 12th. October 12th is clearly the monster Saturday of college football season this year. That's week 7 for those of you who like to keep track in those terms. This is the day where at the same time, or within about a 6-hour span, Ohio State will go to Oregon, Ole Miss will go to LSU, Penn State will go to USC, and Texas will face Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. Now, those are just your 4 headliners. I mean, those are 4 like grade A headline matchups. This same day in the SEC is Florida versus Tennessee Day. This is also the same day that Kansas State goes to face Deion in Colorado. Washington at Iowa, Jed Fish rolling into Iowa City. And then that bottom one there, if you're listening on podcast, you can't see this, but those watching on YouTube, I got Syracuse at NC State. Now, some are looking at that saying, why is that on the list? You need to understand your schedule dynamics here. Syracuse does not play all that tough a schedule this year. NC State's got a pretty navigable schedule as well. They could have much better records than you think they'll probably be capable of by this point, so just pay attention to that game. Now, that's one that's going to be talked about, okay? October 12th is going to be talked about a lot. But what about 4 more that I want to get to? A few weeks after that, week 11. This is going deep. This is going into November now. November 9th is week 11. Oh, this one's very, very big as well. Immunity. Georgia at Ole Miss. As the preseason rankings sit, that's a top 6 matchup. JP poll's not too far off of that for the record. So you got Georgia at Ole Miss, Bama at LSU, same day. Oklahoma at Missouri, same day. Now, of course, we're 11 weeks into the season here, So Oklahoma, they've already played Tennessee. They've gone to Auburn. They've played Texas. What's the record at that point? We don't know. So all we have to go on right now is preseason rankings. Florida's at Texas that day. Again, many of you don't expect Florida to do much this year, but all I can do is I can tell you I've got Florida power rated as the 21st best team in the country. What you think their record's going to be is irrelevant to how you power rate the team. So we're looking at a couple of, top 20, well, one top 5 team, one top 20-ish caliber team there. Even if Florida isn't much to write home about record-wise, no one's predicting that kind of upset for Texas, but yet it's a landmine sort of game. And that's the top of the card. The mid-card on Week 11 slate, which I would argue is not mid-card at all. It's just a little bit further down. I can't claim we were going alphabetically here either. You know what? Florida State Notre Dame's a really big game. That's a top 10 matchup in the preseason. That's up in South Bend. Florida State playing in northern Indiana in early November. Just keep an eye on that. Washington's at Penn State that day. Now, that game could be the whiteout game. Remember, we've got the greatest sport on the face of the earth. We've got the best traditions on the face of the earth. Penn State's whiteout is among the very best traditions in a tradition-rich sport, and we've got television networks paying hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to acquire the rights. Also, they can make the time slots such that we can't get the traditions. Wonderful. Anyway, so Washington may be the whiteout game for Penn State. Clemson's at Virginia Tech that day. Now, Virginia Tech has already played who at this point? They've gone to Miami. They've got some early season tests, but there's no early season test that Virginia Tech faces where you say, nah, they can't get past that one. Virginia Tech, man, they could be in a situation where they're contending for the ACC championship and Clemson comes to town. Miami goes to Georgia Tech that same day. Some of you may be watching college football for the first time in your lives. Welcome. Welcome to the table. We've got room for all. I need to tell you, that Miami-Georgia Tech game, if you want to go and make yourself familiar with some stuff that happened last year in absence of a much stronger term, just go check out the ending of that Miami-Georgia Tech game. So that's a loaded slate. Week 11's a loaded slate. Later, and this is rivalry weekend in Week 14, so of course I've got to fit rivalry weekend. We had a debate internally in the office today. Should we even include rivalry week? Because that's like a given. And the answer was, of course we should include rivalry week. Michigan at Ohio State. Texas at Texas A&M, there is pound for pound not a game I'm looking forward to seeing more this year than Texas going to Texas A&M. Not a neutral site game. We're going into Kyle Field for that one. Oklahoma at LSU. You need to make yourself familiar with this. So this is the week where if you've got a traditional rival, you're playing them. But Oklahoma-Texas happens in the middle of the year. So they're not playing each other last week. LSU doesn't have anyone that they're going to traditionally be paired with during rivalry week. So all of a sudden we get Oklahoma versus LSU dropped in our lap. We, of course, have Notre Dame at USC dropped in our lap. We've got Florida at Florida State on this day. We've got South Carolina at Clemson on this day. We've got Auburn at Alabama on this day. And remember, Washington and Oregon played twice last year. Oregon 0 for 2. Probably a different dynamic this year. But again, that's why we play the games instead of just predicting them on this interesting material called paper. Next up, all right, we get back into the heat of October here. October 26th is Week 9. So we're a little bit deeper in the season here as well. Missouri's got, by my memory, one game against a top 10 opponent, preseason top 10 opponent this year. And it's this day. It's Missouri at Alabama. Oklahoma goes to Ole Miss on this day. You know, when people talk about Ole Miss, they say, oh, they got to play Georgia. Oh, they got to go to LSU. No one really talks about, just Oklahoma coming into Oxford. Florida State at Miami is on this same day. I mean, that could have ACC championship implications. It has its own internal implication baked in because it should be one of the best rivalry games in college football. We talked about this a couple of shows ago. Nebraska's at Ohio State. Now, you know, there are a lot of folks who think Nebraska will be undefeated when they go there. And that's interesting because it's not Week 2, it's Week 9. So if Nebraska's toting a 7 or 8-0 record into the horseshoe, boy, we haven't felt hype like that around Nebraska since the 90s. And then on the undercard of Week 9, Rutgers is at USC. I don't want you laughing at this because Rutgers has a very workable schedule this year as well. They got some veteran leadership on that team. It's Greg Schiano in year 3. Do your research, kids. Penn State's at Wisconsin this day. I'm going to come back to that one in a second. Just bookmark that. LSU's at Texas A&M and Kansas at Kansas State. And if I'm not mistaken, Jesse, Kansas State is fresh off a trip to West Virginia the week before, one of the bigger trap spots on their schedule. Okay, this Penn State-Wisconsin game. You know we're really big on the buy advantage / buy disadvantage. Big-time buy advantage for Penn State here. Penn State is off a bye, so Penn State's rested. They go on the road. Wisconsin is off of back-to-back road games. I think one of them's to Rutgers, but most importantly, the week before they play Penn State, they go to Washington. So they got one of those cross-country trips Wisconsin never takes, the second leg of a back-to-back road stretch, and then they come home to play a rested Penn State. And by the way, Colin, I doubt you just randomly have Wisconsin schedule in there, but I think I have it up here. There may not have been a better year ever to be a Wisconsin season ticket holder than this year, because you got Oregon coming in there, you got Penn State coming in there, you've got Alabama coming in there, and there are some folks around here. I was looking at NC State's home schedule last night. It's brutal. Listen to this. They get Bama at home, they get Penn State at home, and they get Oregon at home, Minnesota to wrap up the year on a Friday. That is value. That is you invest for a decade to get that kind of home stretch. Now, the South Dakota tickets may be able to be had at bargain basement prices. Purdue comes in there probably without a ton of fanfare, but still, how about those big three? All right, and lastly, the last of the big 5 weeks in college football this year, not that we limit it to 5. I would like to take you to September 28th. It's week 5. Georgia's at Alabama. Could very well be the game of the year. It's been the matchup along with Ohio State, Michigan, that sort of has defined the last few years in college football. Arizona at Utah is that day as well. Oklahoma State at Kansas State. 2 of the biggest games in the Big 12 are both on this day, September 28th. Louisville's at Notre Dame. Notre Dame, in many people's estimations, kind of play a 3-game season this year. They open at A&M. They got FSU up there later in the year. They also get Louisville in there. So those are the 3 big games for Notre Dame this year. That's not all, though. Also in week 5, we've got Arkansas at Texas A&M. Well, not at Texas A&M, although I would contend Arkansas needs to get out of this playing in Arlington every year as quick as they can, and I think they are. I think this may be the last year. You got Oklahoma at Auburn. That's the week after OU has faced Tennessee. They go to Auburn. That 2-game stretch, I think, will serve to define what Oklahoma is this year. Va-Tech is at Miami on a Friday night. Oh, the possibilities there, by the way, if you have access to private aviation. Oh, the possibilities. Kentucky at Ole Miss is this day as well. Again, I just mentioned Oklahoma going to Oxford. Kentucky, I think we've got them power rated in the mid-20s in the JP poll, 26th, I believe. Just ho-hum. No one's talking about it. I mean, Ole Miss is viewed as having an extremely favorable schedule, and by SEC standards, they do. They don't have an easy schedule. There are 2 different concepts there. So those are the 5 weeks. Now, I put this out earlier tonight, or earlier today. I asked you guys, and I got all kind of responses. So this is college football, as many of you pointed out. This is college football. So if we've got a Saturday, I mean, we only get 12 of them per team. We have to cherish them, and cherish them we will. Happy to have all of you along. We're going to be on the road every week this fall. That entire tour will be fueled by Quick Trip. Literally, the whole new Saturday tour will be fueled by Quick Trip. Now, you guys know in the past, when we've been on the road with our tours, whether it's the Renaissance Tour or the Every Given Saturday Tour or the Once Upon a Saturday Tour or the whole new Saturday Tour this year, you know that we give away free stuff. And we're sort of aggressive with the concept, but like we're going to Florida for our week 1 game, Miami at Florida. That's our first stop on the whole new Saturday tour, fueled by Quick Trip. I'll give some stuff away. I may toss some free tanks of gas. I may throw an Academy gift card out there. That's been our modus operandi in the past. And then a couple of years ago, so just to give you a little backstory, a couple of years ago, actually, I'll tell you what I'll do, because I don't want the QR code on the screen when I tell this story, so keep the QR code up. This right here is just the app. That's the Quick Trip app. I am strongly encouraging you guys to download that. Number one, because even if you don't watch this show, you ought to have the thing downloaded. But number two, especially if you watch this show, there may soon be some very special carve-outs for you there. All right, now, a few years back, just a little quick story here, and then I'm going to get right back into the show because I got to talk about this Cowherd, Oklahoma thing. A few years ago, we were an up-and-coming college football show. We were trying to make a name for ourselves. Me and Director Colin were hanging out in the old building, and I said, Colin, you know, we have this whole PennSt sub-brand under Late Kick. How can we go full guerrilla marketing with this? And we were like, well, we got fans out there. What if we encouraged them to show support for the show publicly? So we did. And I just made a little passing joke on the show, and I said, some of you ought to show up to college game day this Saturday, hold up a PennSt sign. Well, the problem is like 15 of you did it that very Saturday. And then we got banned from college game day. And ever since then, they have policed those signs, and you're not even allowed to take one on the premises. Now, I gave you guys Chalice of Supremacy. I gave you an Academy gift card. I have it on good authority that the fine folks at Quick Trip are even more about that life than I am. So while you may stand to earn a free tank of gas, if you pose at Quick Trip and tag me on Twitter and I see it, I may toss you a free tank of gas. These folks are probably willing to give away a little bit more than just a free tank of gas if you get Quick Trip signage on the set of College Game Day. Now, that's out of my control, okay? This is like a non-sanctioned match in old school Attitude Era WWE. I can't say that I encouraged it because legally it could get me in trouble, but I also am not going to discourage it. And if you read between the lines, then you read between the lines. But no matter what you do before kickoff, understand that when the games kick off on Saturday and we're there throughout the year, it's fueled by Quick Trip. We appreciate them. All right, what is happening in the state of national media as it relates to the Oklahoma Sooners? I don't do segments like I'm about to do very often, mainly because I don't listen to anyone else talk about the sport, not because I don't like them. It's because I don't want it to poison or influence our show. Let me put it that way. As a result, I end up saying what someone else said before and have no idea they said it, and then I get accused of regurgitating things, and that's not a good thing. But that's okay. An exception is going to be made tonight. Colin, here's your end point. So all of a sudden today, a whole bunch of people, for whatever reason, started tagging this take that Colin Cowherd had in June of 2023 about Oklahoma. I did not hear it at the time. I had no idea he said it. For some reason, it just popped up in everyone's feed today, mine included. So a lot of you asked me, can you talk about it on the show? Sure, I'll talk about it. It's a very atypical segment for our show, but I'll talk about it because I think that there is some proper logic in the points that he made. But I think there is some very improper application. Like, I think he flat out whiffed on the spirit of the take. But yet I think some of the tones, like some of the themes woven into it, make total sense. So I'm about to have Colin play two pieces of sound. The first one, just to let you know, I'm going to tee it up. He had been talking about Nebraska, how Nebraska used to be a superpower. And then Nebraska kind of got left behind as the sport changed. And so Nebraska went from being a superpower to being irrelevant on the national championship scene because what used to work for Nebraska no longer worked for Nebraska. And his entire premise was, could Oklahoma be the next Nebraska? So again, this is from June of 2023. So keep in mind, now he had just seen Lincoln Riley come off, or not Lincoln Riley, he had seen him leave. He had seen Brent Venables come off a 6-7 season. So he had not seen the double-digit win season that is to come. But a lot of the evidence was already there, and maybe he was just seeing it differently. So is Oklahoma going to be the next Nebraska is the premise. Colin, roll it.
Keep your eye on Oklahoma. Is Oklahoma going to be the second program in our adult lives that disappears? Number one, the state no longer produces big numbers of players. Of the Sooners' 26 signees in their recruiting class, 3 are from the state of Oklahoma. That's having to convince kids in the South, convince kids in Texas, come to us. Secondly, they joined a tougher conference. Like Nebraska, this is going to be harder. Most of those Southern kids have grown up on the SEC. Those football players want to stay with traditional SEC powers. And number 3, in an offensive era, they hired a defensive coach, and he was completely, utterly over his skis. They didn't get the coach right.
So, man, I think he nailed it and whiffed completely all at one time. So let's break this down for just a second. The lack of in-state talent is a total misnomer. Oklahoma, if they wanted to, could go land 25 kids in the state of Oklahoma. There probably aren't 25 kids in the state of Oklahoma to the level needed to commit to Oklahoma. But don't misunderstand now. There absolutely are fewer players of that caliber in the state of Oklahoma per year than there are Georgia, than there are Florida, than there are Texas. That is a gross misunderstanding of the situation when it comes to Oklahoma recruiting. You want to talk about the lack of in-state talent? It's true, but it's also irrelevant. I'll tell you why. Because if you know anything about the Red River and south of it down to Dallas, Oklahoma owns that area every bit as much as Texas does in recruiting. Oklahoma kills it in Texas, specifically the Dallas area. Oklahoma, in the 2023 recruiting class, had 13 states represented. In the 2024 class, 12 states represented. Brent Venables has been a top 10 recruiter every year he's been at Oklahoma. So the reason they don't land a ton of kids in Oklahoma is not a bad thing. The reason they don't land them is because they can go elsewhere and get better players. Because this is not Georgia. This is not Alabama. They do have to broaden their net. And the follow-up is they do it. They do it very well. They do it exceptionally well in Texas. So the lack of in-state talent represented on the roster is totally irrelevant to what the quality of team is. They've also landed 2 top 10 portal classes in the past 3 cycles. Went and got a big-time defensive tackle that LSU wanted badly to choose Oklahoma over LSU this last cycle. And also, man, if you follow recruiting, if you're really in the weeds of this stuff, state lines do matter, but state lines have never mattered less than they matter now in recruiting. In the portal, NIL, and also advanced digital and social media age, the world's never felt smaller. The country, the map has never felt smaller. State lines have never been less relevant to where a recruit wants to go. In the old school, in the 90s and the 2000s, it meant something to cross the Chattahoochee River or to cross the Red River. Now it's just, I play Xbox with that guy from that city called Tulsa all the time, and I'm from Denton. That you don't even think about them being 2 different states the way a kid in 1995 would. That's the first thing. The second thing is playing in a tougher conference. Oklahoma's going to a tougher conference. That's true. And if that turns you off, you're not going to be the head coach at Oklahoma to begin with. More on that in a second. But secondly, there's a trade-off to joining a tougher conference. And that trade-off, as it relates to talent acquisition, is all of a sudden your games are on in Florida and Georgia and the Carolinas and Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama every Saturday. They care about you down there because they're going to have to play you. Therefore, the kids in those states are exposed to your brand more than willing to go play at Oklahoma. Oklahoma fits the SEC profile like a glove. This is not some oil and water situation. And thirdly, hiring a defensive coach in an offensive era, how about go hire the right coach? Hiring the right coach is the key. Georgia hired the right coach. They couldn't have cared less that he's defensive-minded. Oregon's hired the right one. They couldn't care less he's defensive-minded. I'd also encourage folks to take a look at the regression back to the middle of overall style of college football. Points per game have decreased the last couple of years. So if anything, you saw an explosion, but you didn't see a perma-trend towards offense over defense in this sport. Take a look at who won the national title last year, by the way, and how they did it. And also, there's probably nobody that knows their head coach better than the folks inside the building at Oklahoma know their head coach. I point that out because they just extended him. They've seen all they need to see. They already extended Brent Venables. So I understand. Now, I understand where Colin Cowherd's going on that. I understand completely that if you're not careful, the winds of change in this sport can leave you behind. That's true. It's just not going to victimize Oklahoma. It's not in the process of doing it. It will not do it. Now, there was a second part to this. So I'm going to have Colin tee it up, and I'll react to it on the back end.
And why did Lincoln Riley leave? Because he was joining the SEC, looked at the Bamas and the Georgias and the LSUs and the Floridas and those states and those kids and their leanings. and USC was wide open. By the way, you think Lincoln Riley didn't have a gut feeling somehow, some way, kind of felt Oklahoma to the SEC was going to be a hard pull? You go into Alabama and Georgia and LSU's backyard, welcome to SEC football.
Let me grant you all that. Just for the sake of time and argument, let's say everything he just suggested there is true. You could have multiple truths in the room here. You could have the truth that Lincoln Riley was excellent at Oklahoma. It could also be that Lincoln Riley was not the guy to take this program into this conference. Both of those things could be true. You know, a third thing could be true, and that's they had the right guy on speed dial the entire time, and it's the current head coach at Oklahoma, Brent Venables. This is not some guarantee of anything. Just like there's no guarantee that Lincoln Riley is going to get it served up to him on a silver platter when he goes to USC, because it hasn't happened there. You know, if you've got any reservations about your ability to recruit in the SEC, you don't need to be the head coach at Oklahoma. If you've got any reservations about your style working in the SEC, you don't need to be the head coach of Oklahoma. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, you go your way, they'll go their way. But I just want you to remember this year, 5 years down the road, I want you to remember, for better or for worse, there was no massive coaching search here. There was no broad net cast across the country. Lincoln Riley left. It stunned them. They dusted themselves off. And a few days later, they had Brent Venables in Norman. And that was it. It's one of the most buttoned-down athletic departments. It's one of the strongest cultures in college athletics, multiple sports. And they've got their act together. They went and got who they wanted. They had him handpicked. They've already extended his contract. So the logic tracks here. The logic that if you're not careful, dynamics in college football can change and leave you behind, totally accurate. It's happened before. He pointed out that it's happened before. There's a sweet spot that college football can have you in any given point. The Texases and Alabamas and Ohio States will always be there. There is no change that's going to come to this sport, as he pointed out earlier in that segment, that's going to leave them behind. There are changes that could come to the sport that could do the kind of things that happened to Nebraska. So the sweet spot of college football does change. Some will always be in it. Oklahoma is just one of them. Oklahoma is going to be at the head table of college football for a long time. Oklahoma is at the head table of college football. They've been there for a long time, and they will be there for a long time. There is no seismic shift in this sport that's doing anything other than tilting the table a little bit further in the direction of Oklahoma. I would actually counter the argument and make the counter that the sport is more favorable. The dynamics in college football are more favorable to Oklahoma now than they have been over the past 20 years. And over the past 20 years, they've been one of the best programs in the country. So I get the logic, man, but I totally disagree with the application of it. I will agree with you, however, or I will agree to disagree with you happily if we're doing it at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Any aisle, you guys pick the aisle. Academy Sports and Outdoors has you set for back to school, got you set for back to sports. Showed you the other night, one of our lovely viewers found some coyote juice there. If you don't know what it is, look it up. And the point that I always try and hammer home is they've got pretty much anything you need for sporting goods, anything you need for outdoor grilling, camping, etc. But they've also got a lot of stuff you don't even know exists, or maybe you know exists, but you don't think it's at Academy. Academy Sports and Outdoors has been one of our partners nearly from day one. They make this show free of charge for you. We always appreciate them. If you have one in your backyard, go check it out tomorrow. If you don't have one in your backyard, academy.com has you set up. Right now it is August 20th, so I know a lot is changing. If you've got kids especially, a lot's changing in your life. If you are a kid, if you're in high school, if you're in college, a lot's changing in your life. You probably need some things you didn't need 2 months ago. They've got it on one of the many aisles or web pages of Academy Sports and Outdoors and academy.com. All right, let's predict some stuff. We've got bold predictions on the back end of the show tonight. But first, what's Tennessee's record going to be this year? A lot of bubbling momentum around this program, at least if you take my word for it. Well, here's what you need to know about Tennessee this year. Their over-under win total has been interesting at FanDuel. It was 8.5. Then it shot up to 9.5. Now it's come back down to 8.5. Now, of course, you got to lay a lot more to bet that over than you do the under. It's heavily juiced to the over. 7th best odds to win the SEC. 12th best odds to win the whole thing, the college football playoff. So it's a deep conference, at least in preseason terms, in the SEC this year. Let's talk about what we think we know. I think I know these things about Tennessee. I think I know the offense will be much closer to the 2022 version than last year's version. I expect the passing game to scale significantly. They had the best passing game in the country, best points per game in the country in 2022. Last year, points per game, they were tied for 35th. Yeah, that's going up. Nico Iamaleava, don't need to have seen him start a whole year to know he's a stud, at least enough to make that number go up significantly. I think their run game will always be good under Josh Heupel. One of the great misnomers about Josh Heupel is it's just this shot offense. It's just this like air raid, 4 verts every play, Mike Leach passing off. It's not that. It's not that. They run the ball, consistently run the ball. Got one of the best rushing games in the country every year, and yet people get amnesia and they totally forget about that. The second thing I think I know about Tennessee, James Pierce on the edge for them, probably one of the best players in the country, preseason All-American, maybe the top edge player in America this year. And at the very least, he's up there and vying for that. And there are probably some impact players on this team that are on the defensive side that you wouldn't expect because everyone thinks offense when they think Tennessee. One of the big questions we have about this team is about the other side, opposite James Pierce. We'll talk about that in a second. A third thing I think I know is this program has major scale-up energy about it right now, and that doesn't necessarily impact their win-loss record. What it does is it puts them in position to where if they win 10 or 11 games, if they have a great year, if they have another special year like they did year before last, they could really be off to the races. I think they already are. I think this year's result will just further bolster that. But I know a lot of you aren't as bullish on Tennessee as I am. So a lot of you have to see it to believe it. That's fine. Here's what I want to know. I want to know how they're going to backfill losing all these pieces in the secondary. They lost like between 150 and 200 starts in the secondary last year. To this year, they lost 5 of 6 guys back there. And they also lost Jordan Thomas early in fall camp. And he was probably running as the one at nickel for them. So not only are they replacing a lot of guys who left from last year, they've already had injury strike that group this year. That's the first thing, because there's a big difference in having to, be first to 40 every week because you've got the same problems this year that LSU's secondary had last year. There's a big difference between that and not being a great pass defense, but being plenty serviceable enough. Are they going to be the former or the latter? Another thing that I want to know, how many difference makers are on this team? How many game breakers are on this team? We look past quarterback for this because every quarterback is going to directly impact the game in a big way, one way or the other. Brew McCoy is still on this team. Squirrel White's still on this team. They went and got Brazel, the transfer wide receiver from Tulane. Arian Carter, linebacker. Elijah Herring, linebacker. There are a lot of guys who are former big names in recruiting, very talented. Do we have any game breakers? Because the third thing that I want to know is, it kind of bleeds into the second thing. I know I've got James Pierce. I know he fits this description. Do I have anyone on the opposite side of that defensive line that can do that? Or is all the attention on him? All right, now the third thing I want to know. Nico Iamaleava physically has all the traits you need. Josh Heupel and his staff fully believe in him. There's always an adjustment period in this game, especially if you're in a Big Ten or an SEC environment where you got a lot of really highly paid coaches, a lot of deep coaching staffs, a lot of analysts off the field with a lot of time on their hands, and they're just focused on you. And if you're a first-year starter, you're making your first go-around, the SEC, a lot of really, really good football minds are singularly focused on stopping you. And sometimes they succeed, which begs the question, how good is Nico Iamaleava at adjusting to the league's adjustments? It's no different than a big league hitter. When he comes up and he starts hot, and then all of a sudden they figure out, wow, off speed, low and in, he can't handle for some reason. Either yanks it foul or he's over the top of it. So let's just pepper him with that until he shows that he can adjust. Now, sometimes they do adjust. Hands inside the ball, middle away, we're good. Sometimes they don't adjust. And sometimes you're back down in AAA after you were on the cover of Sports Illustrated the prior month and you're like, what happened? Sometimes that happens with quarterbacks as well. So that's the great unknown with any guy who gets his first chance to start. The coaching staff here, really interesting, really dangerous and underrated coaching staff. So Heupel, the model has graded as a top 25 head coach, but Heupel is a 4.5-star offensive coordinator. If you just look at him as an offensive coordinator, he's right up there with some of the best in the country. He has got an insanely good offensive support staff. It is top 5 in the country. The defensive support staff is top half of the SEC. Now, Tim Banks is the defensive coordinator there. Model has him graded low. If you said there's a weakness on the coaching staff, relatively speaking, it would be the defensive coordinator position, but he had a really good 2023. His 2023, if he were to duplicate that again, you're no longer using that terminology about him. This is not my opinion, by the way, I'm sharing. This is model output. This thing's blind. It has no emotion. It doesn't even know where Knoxville, Tennessee is. This is a top 15 staff, and it's a top 15 recruiting staff. The 1 through 11, especially, so the traditional on-field guys, that is top 15 in the country and top 15 recruiting in the country. That's very underrated. People don't think about Tennessee like that. There's some coaching staffs out there that you guys would rank above them that in reality do not belong above them. And then if you pop another 10 or 11 win season and you also get to backload with the new NCAA coaching rules with off the field guys all of a sudden being on the field, it's only going to get deeper. What about the schedule here? It's one of the best draws, which is ironic because they play Alabama and Georgia, but it's still one of the best draws. So follow me here. They only play 3 teams in the JP poll top 25. Now, they are really good teams. They go to Oklahoma in week 4. It's one of my circle games. I can't wait for that one. It's Josh Heupel going back to Norman, Tennessee's first time on the road this year in a true road environment. It's Oklahoma's first SEC game, I think. So that one's going to be really good. But look at week 2. I was on Pack Pride with those guys on their radio show last night. We spent a fair amount of time talking about this game. Tennessee folks, SEC folks do not focus on that week 2 game. That is like one of 2 Super Bowls for NC State this year. They're looking at that one in Charlotte. That's a neutral site game against Tennessee. And they're looking at the Clemson game. And they think if they can split there, they got a pretty reasonable shot of challenging for an ACC championship appearance. So don't catch yourself in ambush mode there. Tennessee will be well represented over there. It won't be like some hostile environment, no more so than it'll be for NC State. But that is not one to just look at and go, dub, and then move on. This is not the NC State team to think that way, especially because the wide receiver core they have over there, they believe, is the best they've had in a long time. They got a very, very veteran transfer quarterback, and your secondary is your biggest question mark right now. So be very careful with that NC State game. I feel like we just broke the game down. They go to Oklahoma in week 4 again. Like I said, that is one of my circle games of the year. Best case record for Tennessee this year, 11-1. If everything comes together for them, there is absolutely an 11-1 on this slate. The worst case, I think, is 7-5. So, what do we predict? I was way between 9-3 and 10-2. Because I have a first-year starter at quarterback, questions in the secondary, and I do play at Georgia, and I do play Alabama, and I do play Florida at home. I've got at Oklahoma. I've got that weird neutral site game there. I think there's enough uncertainty for me to predict 9-3. It is very, very close to 10-2. And 10-2 has them in the playoff. There's a world where 9-3 has Tennessee in the playoff. So this is very much on the precipice, sort of a seesaw, 9-3, 10-2 for me. I've got them 14th in the preseason JP poll. So everything's on the table for Tennessee. 11-1 wouldn't shock me. 10-2, 9-3, that's kind of where I would predict their record. All right, let's move right along. I got a lot of folks watching live. Thank you guys so much. Make sure it's that time. I do this about once every 2 weeks. You guys probably think you're subscribed. Make sure you are, because some of you think you are and you are not. On the podcast side and on the YouTube side. Just take 2 seconds. Make sure you're subbed. If you're not, please do it for no reason other than it helps us out. It doesn't sign you up for any mailing list. You're not going to get spammed. You don't have to pay anything. It's nothing like that. It just helps us. And then get 5 of your friends to do the same. Question from one of you. Corey hit me up. He said, it seems like in this new Power 2, Power 4 world we're in, that you are down on the ACC as a whole. On a scale from 1 to 10, does the ACC have a legitimate chance of winning a national title this year? I'm not sure how I'd rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. I'd say no. I don't think they have a national championship contender over there. Now, that's way different than playoff contender, okay? We're no longer in the 4-team era. You're guaranteed to have one team in the playoff. I think the ACC is going to have 2 teams in the playoff. That's my prediction. So it's not a playoff contender. You're asking me, do I look at one of these teams and say, that one right there, I legit could see winning the national title? I can't see a team from this conference winning the national title. I'm going to walk you through why I think that way. It's a very lofty conversation, okay? At Clemson, there's enough question for me around Kay Klubnik and Garrett Riley in year 2 here. I mean, there's a lot of promise. Love those 2 young receivers they've brought in. But then if I get in the playoff and I got to run through a string of Texas and then Notre Dame and then Georgia, if I got to run up against Alabama, if I see Ohio State or Oregon, multiples of those, I mean, is my offensive line where it needs to be? Is my ground game where it needs to be? Can my young receivers get separation against those defensive backs? Can I win several of those games? I don't think Clemson can. If they're there, I don't think they can. Florida State. Mike Norvell thinks the world of the DNA of his team, and I agree. I'm blindly taking his word for that. But you're going to have to show me at Florida State that you've replaced that talent you've lost enough to where not only can you win the ACC and make the playoff, but you could go win 3 games and win the whole thing, win the national title. You're going to have to show me that. DJ Uiagalelei winning a national title, you being able to ask him to win a couple of games for you against the best of the best, that wide receiver core being able to step up and them get separation and then make big plays and change games, have a dynamic enough offense. That is something I'd have to see to believe. Miami, ironically, if we're talking about talent profiles, Cam Ward's got the best chance to end up being elite enough. Their pass rush has probably as good a chance as any of being able to be elite and game-breaking enough. They've got good running back depth. They've got receivers like Restrepo and then guys that can work downstream of him. Got the kid from Houston that could be a breakout star. The talent profile from Miami probably strikes me as one that's more likely to do it. But you're talking about having to bridge a gulf from underachievement for years and years and years to all of a sudden in 1 year, you're in the playoff and you go win the whole thing. Again, that's a bridge too far for me. I can't see Miami doing it. I can't see Florida State doing it. I can't see Clemson doing it. Solid teams. We're talking about going and beating Oregon and Ohio State. We're talking about going and beating Bama and Georgia and Texas. These teams I don't think are going to do that this year. And not just beating one of them. You got to beat like several of them. That's the whole point. Next up, where have we heard this question before? Boy, no one has broached this subject. Mark from Cleghorn, Wisconsin. Ryan Day is turning into the boy who cried wolf. How important is 2024 for him and the perception of his coaching ability? Does something happen if he can't win this year? Mark, what do you mean by can't win? Does he have to win 1 game, 9 games? Does he have to win the whole thing? I always have to nail you guys down on this because, like, you use this nebulous terminology, and the rule around here is only I should be allowed to do that. Yes, we all agree there. So, I don't have to answer this question, Mark. I went up to Columbus, Ohio a few months ago, and I just asked Ryan Day for myself. I asked him about pressure. I asked him about not being able to beat Michigan 3 years in a row, what needs to change. So we kind of went and addressed it with the man himself. Roll it, Colin.
You talk about chasing the 1% a lot, and you guys have put up just an insane win-loss record here, and then there have been big moments where you haven't followed through on it like you want to. Internally, I know there are a million layers to the way you eval yourself and your organization. Outside, it's just, did you win the game or did you not win the game? Does it strike you how crazy it is, the complete validation that's praised upon you if you win the last game of the season versus the total indictment it is on your program if you lose it? And You got a bunch of humans in this building. How do you block that out and make sure folks, keep their racehorse blinders on and understand, yeah, we lost here. It should feel terrible, but there are specific reasons why, instead of just, we suck, burn it down, let's start over from scratch.
I think you have to enhance the things that are going well and then address the things that need to get addressed and identify the right things that need to get fixed. And I think that goes back to making sure you have the right guys in the right seat, making sure you have enough experience in the locker room. Because we have to win games in the fourth quarter and we have to win games at the end of the year. And usually you're doing that with guys who are 21, 22, 23 years old. That's just the truth. And so that was important. I think the other part is making sure the staff is exactly what we need it to be. And hiring Chip was a big deal. It really allowed me some opportunity to make sure that I'm overseeing everything, especially with everything going on in college football right now. But it's, like you said, you have to identify the things that are going well and then fix the things. And this job isn't for the faint of heart. You can be a play or two away and, feel like you're right on that cusp. But you got to make hard decisions. You got to make hard calls because that's what needs to be done to make sure that, our team is in the right situation to win all these games.
All right, so it's been like 3.5 minutes now. But if I remember correctly, Colin, if I remember correctly, Jesse, the question alleged that Ryan Day could turn into the boy who cried wolf. And to be honest, I have no clue what this means. I think I know what you think it means. What you think you were saying is Ryan Day keeps writing the headlines about himself. Ryan Day keeps voting his team number one. Ryan Day keeps picking his team to win the national title. Well, Ryan Day doesn't do any of that. I do. You do. They do. We do. So if I pick Ohio State to do something, like win the national title, which I did last year, and they don't win it, yeah, Ryan Day didn't get it done, but I'm the one whose pick fell through. So I cried wolf. He didn't cry wolf. He may have yelled at Lou Holtz in a post-game press conference, which I still wouldn't apologize for if I were him, but he didn't cry wolf. So that's what he actually says. Ryan Day doesn't do a whole lot of these sit-down one-on-ones. He's done 2 of them with us this spring and summer. And I appreciate the access that he gives us. I appreciate the answers he gives us. You know what else he said? I didn't have time to run it. Later in that segment, he said, if I don't get it done here, they'll fire me and they'll go get someone else to do it. I don't shy away from the pressure of this job. These are things he talked about. If you haven't watched that, if you're an Ohio State fan or you're just interested in the way these guys think, we've got like 40 minutes with him from the spring. Go search it on the YouTube channel. It was one of the best visits and sit-downs we did. They were great up there, gave us full access, and I think a really eye-opening interview with Ryan Day. So then fast forward back here. So they're going to be preseason number 1 or number 2, wherever you look. They're going to be picked to win the Big Ten. They're going to be picked to go to the playoff, maybe win it all. I will echo that. I'm going to pick them to do some of those things. Look, here's what I'll say. I think there's a total disconnect in understanding the world those coaches live in, which is not to say there's not pressure on them, which is not to say Ryan Day doesn't need to get the job done. All of those things are true. What I'm just saying is, and what I've observed about these guys is there are some coaches, let me back up. What I've observed about these coaches, and I'm around a lot of them, is they all say they don't care what the public says about them. Only some of them mean it. So you got to determine, like, who are you? If you're Ryan Day, if you're any of these guys, do you say you don't care about what other folks think, or do you actually not care about what other folks think? Because he's got a world-class program in Columbus, Ohio. They may have the best talent roster in America this year. They're going to be picked to do a lot of big things. They should be picked to do a lot of big things. They have come up short the last few years. Not far off, but they've come up short. They hadn't finished the job that they set out to do, and it's because they weren't good enough. So is that a reflection of him? Well, ultimately, the entire organization is. But there's a big difference, in being on rung 9 of a 10-rung ladder versus being on rung 2. The difference, I think, is the perception a lot of people have is you're either on the top rung or the bottom rung. There's like no in between, which has always been dumb to me. But the attitude that you have, if you don't care about what other folks think, is you just run your race. You just coach your team. You just run your program. And if you fail, you get back up, like he just talked about, and you apply the lessons you learned. And then over time, it's no different than succeeding in business. A lot of you own businesses. Did you knock it out of the park in year 1 or year 2? Even if you had advantages baked in? Maybe so, maybe not. Did you keep making the same mistakes over and over again? That's what makes you a failure. I can't wait to see how this season plays out, because I think that there are not only some staff changes he made there, man, I think there are some philosophical slight course corrections, not wholesale changes, but just a little tweak here, a little shift there, a little angle correction there, to where Ohio State football just looks like a little more streamlined version, a little more sledgehammerish version of itself than it has in the past. But here's the follow-up to that. The downside of it, this is not about Ryan Day, but this is just in general. The second you care about what other folks think, you're done. You're on your way to becoming one of them. You're on your way to talking into a mic for a living, or you're on your way to having to pay to attend games, or maybe they'll give you a sideline pass and you come and you're honored for what you once did for this program. But here's the way it works. It infects your mind, because what happens is not only are you making split-second decisions, not only are you making very pivotal decisions, whether it be a hire, whether it be who to start, whether it be how to tweak your strength and conditioning program, not only are you doing that, but there's this little voice in the back of your head, and it asks, what will writers at the Columbus Post-Dispatch say about this? What will guys over on the 11 Warriors or Bucknuts message board say about this? What's Zach Smith going to say about this tomorrow? What is the entire media ecosystem in Columbus going to say? You're done. You are screwed if you ever think like that. It poisons your mind. And so the big question about Ryan Day, the big question about any head coach at any point at Ohio State is not, will he have the resources? They all will. It's not, will they have the talent? To a certain degree, they all will. It's, are you the right guy for the job? I think the answer is yes with Ryan Day. Then part two is mentally, from the neck up, are you wired to shut that stuff out and just run your race? If he does, they will win a national championship at Ohio State. I've got very little doubt about it, because I think he's good enough. I think they're well-resourced enough. I think they're in perfect position. That is not always the way this sport works, though. It's not Xbox. It's the real world. And there are consequences to letting the outside noise affect you. How will this season play out? Well, tune in Thursday, because I'll make my final prediction. So at least you'll see what I think. They're watching us in Charlotte, North Carolina. They're watching us in Eagle River, Alaska, a market I have always said is untapped in the college football front. And they're watching us in Covington, Georgia. Thank you so much. Boy, how about this news last night out of Tuscaloosa? How many of you know who Courtney Morgan is? Diehard fans do. Maybe some of the more, not the casual fans, maybe some of the more casual-minded fans. Maybe the Saturday-only crowd. Maybe you don't know who that is. Lucas from Huntsville hit me up. He said, what do you think are the ramifications for Alabama giving their general manager, Courtney Morgan, such a huge extension? They're big, man. Huge. So Courtney Morgan's the GM at Alabama. He came with Kalen DeBoer from Washington. Just signed a new 3-year deal, $825K per year. I saw this breaking news from Matt Zenitz last night. Just another Z-bomb in a world of breaking news. I saw this news, and probably within the next 5 minutes, I had texts from 3 different general managers at 3 different major programs. 2 of them just sent the champagne emoji, and a third one sent words that were tantamount to popping champagne. And the reason is because Courtney Morgan just got paid, and Courtney Morgan just got all of them paid. It was a landmark. It was like a watershed moment for people at the head of personnel departments. Because for a long time, there's been this kind of sport-imposed ceiling on what your max earnings potential could be there. Well, that thing's been shattered 9 ways from Sunday. So now it's anyone's guess. This is like, I remember back in the day, Albert Bell. We once did a segment in my elementary school class. Albert Bell was the first $10 million per year Major League Baseball guy. Ooh, I think Mike Schmidt once upon a time, way back in the day before my time, was the first $1 million per year earner. And everybody had the same conversation. How could these guys be paid this much? It's just a sport. Well, how much does Aaron Judge make now? He makes like $10 million a month now. So people, let me tell you 2 things. First off, I don't think people appreciate what Alabama's pulling off here. Bama had the best in the world. Bama had the best of all time there for a decade and a half. When you lose him, it's supposed to be like pivoting the Titanic in Moon Lake in Phoenix City, Alabama. It's supposed to be a lot more difficult than this. You're not supposed to just, at the drop of a hat, say, Nick Saban retired. I'm going to go get a top 3 head coach in college football. He's going to bring his all-star general manager with him. We're going to retain, outside of Caleb Downs, Isaiah Bond, a couple of guys, ironically enough, pictured there, outside of a couple of guys, we're going to retain our roster. We're going to get one of them to transfer back, who left us for Iowa, and we're going to proceed to go lock down a top 3 recruiting class. Just like that. We're also not going to react to the market. We're just going to go set the market. Alabama shouldn't be doing this. No program should be doing this. When you've got Nick Saban, the trade-off to having Nick Saban is logic tells you once you lose Nick Saban, there's going to be a dry run. And there's going to be some rot, and there's going to be some laziness, and there's going to be some entitlement. And folks who have not had to think for themselves for a long time are having to learn to think for themselves. And in reality, that is not it. That's not it at Alabama. So they're pulling off something they shouldn't be able to pull off here. Now, as for Courtney Morgan, so Bama's paying Courtney Morgan over $800,000 a year now. Why so much? Because he controls the roster there. And roster is the beginning and ending of this sport. I don't care how good your coaching staff is. If they don't have players, you don't have a job for long. So right now, Bama, not only do I want you to look at the team they were able to retain once those guys walked in the building for this year, look at the recruiting class they're in the process of putting together for the upcoming cycle and cycles moving forward. Some of you disagreed with me last night and said, oh, Bama would be fine no matter what. You're wrong. You're wrong. I know what's going on. You're wrong about that. No, they wouldn't. Bama would be fine. Fine is not the standard in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Like, what are we talking about? 8-4, finishing the top 25 in recruiting? Yeah, they could do that. A ham sandwich could do that at Alabama. They had one. They had several of them between the Bear Bryant era and, with early 90s exception, the Nick Saban era. They don't want fine. That's not the standard there anymore. So Courtney Morgan gets paid what he's paid, and you either got one of two reactions to that. Either you say, well, $800,000 for a general manager, what are we doing? Or you say, yeah, that won't be a headline in 2 years, because in 2 years, because of Courtney Morgan being paid $800,000, he'll probably already have been bumped up again, and there'll be 3 7-figure per year earners, and then there'll be 10 7-figure per year earners. Everybody's GM will be paid that. I mean, that's real power, by the way, in any walk of life, in any industry. A lot of guys can get themselves paid. Only a few of them can get a bunch of their peers paid. Courtney Morgan just got a bunch of his peers paid. He knows Kalen DeBoer's system inside and out. He knows his way of doing things. That's one reason to pay him that. Connectivity to players, relatability to players, that's another reason to pay him that. Roster retention and talent acquisition, and understanding both of those markets inside and out. I mean, intimately being ahead of the game, kind of seeing around the corner instead of reacting. That's another reason to pay him that. You can't be reactionary, man. You just lost the best of all time. You can't afford to be reactionary. I mean, you had a guy who built Alabama into what it is today. He set the standard. He stepped down in his prime. He didn't wait until the program eroded and this cultural rot had set in on the back end, like some other icons have done in the past. He built a monster. He stepped down while it was still a monster. He tossed the keys. Kalen DeBoer grabbed him out of the air and said, Courtney Morgan, you're coming with me to Tuscaloosa. He comes with him. Big-time offers come immediately. I'm telling you, Southern Cal came after him hard. Courtney Morgan grew up in L.A., by the way, and he turned it down to stay there. That's why you pay him what you're paying him. You don't keep up with the market at Alabama. You set the market. You are the market. That's the way it's been for a long time. So if you're going to keep getting what you've been getting, you have to continue being what you've been. This is part of it. You don't count pennies. Like you don't save a couple $100,000 here and there when it comes to something as valuable and quintessential as roster. Roster's everything in this sport. Now here's another thing that I think is very, very appealing to many people in this audience. Some of you everybody who's listening loves this sport. Every one of you who are listening, me included, we love college football. I've never coached this sport. Most of you have not coached the sport, or if you have, you haven't coached it at a high level. So very, very few people in this audience look and immediately see a path for themselves to one day working at Kentucky or working at Texas A&M or working at Michigan State. But I'm telling you, doors are opening every day. And I recognize it because it's been happening in my business. I wouldn't be sitting here 15 years ago. But I'm sitting here now because the game changed in media. And all of a sudden, in the mid-20 teens, a couple of barriers got broken down in the way of overhead and distribution. You used to need multi-million-dollar studios. You used to need big-time legacy media distribution and networking deals for your voice to ever resonate from Seattle to Miami and LA to New York. Now, you just need to be good enough and have internet. And if you are good enough, you can build your own audience. That changed 10 years ago. So here we are. College football is changing. And college football all of a sudden is evolving into a sport that now has not only niche-based roles, but huge front-facing, high-earning positions for guys that may or may not have played the game, may or may not have coached the game. I was on a stage with Courtney Morgan 2 weeks ago in Nashville, and we were doing a panel, and I asked him about what had happened in his life to prepare him to be the GM at Alabama. 80% of what he talked about had nothing to do with football. I mean, he's worked in all kinds of different avenues, totally outside the game. Some of you are in that position right now, and you may or may not love your job, but you'd really love to work inside college football. If you're brilliant with numbers, if you're brilliant with finance, if you're brilliant with communication, if you're brilliant with psychology, there are all kinds of different avenues opening up. This is just another example of it that are gateways, non-traditional, very new age gateways for some of you who love this sport, but you've always had to watch it from outside the fence to knock down the fence and get inside and find your spot. It's there. I'm telling you, it has never been there in a greater abundance now and in the future than it is today. So it's a very interesting time. This is going to get a lot of people paid. This is going to be a headline that people laugh at being a big deal 5 years from now. All the big-time GMs will be seven-figure per year earners 5 years from now. I got another take for you. I think one of these dudes is going to end up being the head coach of a team. Maybe not a team as high profile as Alabama. Someone out there is going to value this position, and someone out there is going to think they can overspend at the coordinator spots to the point where their head coach doesn't need to check the traditional boxes that a head coach once checked. Someone in an experimental fashion is going to try that. I don't know when, I don't know where, but a guy that today you would call a GM or a director of player personnel, someone's going to make that person a head coach one day. Not in Alabama, but a second or third tier program, and we'll just see how it works out. Next up, we continue predicting. We roll merrily along here. Big question. This ought to go swimmingly because everyone's totally logical when I talk about this team. What will Penn State's record be this year? And then bonus question, is James Franklin overrated? Is Penn State overrated? It's an inside joke. If you know, you know. Their over-under win total, here's what you need to know. It is 9.5. FanDuel has the over-under win total at 9.5. FanDuel has them with the third best odds to win the Big Ten. They have got the sixth best odds to make the playoff. Let me repeat. Penn State, in a roundabout way, is favored to make the playoff. They would have been in the last several years if we had a 12-team playoff. James Franklin's entering year 11. Here's what I think I know about his team. Defense will again be very strong. Very strong. The defensive line is full of seniors, got a ton of experience there. They've got a great edge duo. They've got a great safety duo. We're hearing good things about the corners that they got in there. They got Kimber and they got Harris in the transfer market. So feel good, again, about defense. I think if they handle this offense right, they should have, outside of Ohio State, and it will probably behoove them that I said that because they can use it for motivation, but outside Ohio State, where should I have a better 1-2 combo of tailback than, Singleton and Allen last year should have been better than they were. This year, those guys both have 1,000-yard potential about them. So, again, new coordinator in, so we'll see how that unfolds. But I think I know they should be very dynamic, and that should be a strength of that team. And I think I know, this will be a little more controversial, Drew Aller is a strength of this team. Now, Drew Aller, although he had a good year in terms of touchdown to turnover rate last year, 29-2, People think he sucked last year. That's because they sucked offensively in big games. But he was a good player last year. First full year as a starter. This will be his second full year as a starter, which leads me, we can go right into what I need to know. I need to know, will he be put in a better position than he was last year? They brought in Koldenicki, the coordinator from Kansas. A lot of hope riding on that. A lot of hope of their offense being more explosive in big games. You guys remember the Ohio State and Michigan game last year. It was terrible. I was at both those games. It was bad. Outside that, they moved the ball fairly well. But that doesn't really matter because outside of those games, what else are we really talking about? This is Penn State. Like, that's who you're there to beat. Will a wide receiver one emerge on this team? They had Lambert Smith that transferred down to Auburn. And so who are we looking at here? Julian Fleming transferred in from Ohio State, to Pennsylvania guy. He kind of profiles as that guy, so to speak. Do they have one? Will this offense generate one? You know, will there be more opportunity? Tight end's a really good and deep position for them. That'll help a little bit as well. How good are they at corner? That's another question I have. They brought in A.J. Harris, former Central Red Devil, for those of you down in the Bi-City area. They brought him in. They brought Kimber in from Georgia. Davian Collins is a guy who came there 2 years ago, and he's been one of the talks of their fall camp. If that room has come together like they're suggesting it has, losing King and losing Dixon, that should be a weakness. If it's not a weakness, that's a huge bonus for this team. What about the coaching staff? I mean, this will be clipped to the ends of the world because everyone wants to know about the coaching staff at Penn State. Well, I've got every one of them graded in this model, and we all know the model does not lie. I'm going to give you comps. A lot of times I tell you where the guys are rated. I'm going to go one step further for Penn State. I'm going to tell you where the model places these coaches. James Franklin would be sandwiched kind of in between a Dave Doran, a Matt Campbell, Brett Bielema. Brett Bielema is a pretty highly rated coach, by the way. That's where he would profile. Andy Koldenicki, the new offensive coordinator. You want to know who he'd be right up against? Bobby Petrino. So, if anything, a very fun season ahead for Penn State's offense. The offensive support staff here is kind of average, you know, by major college football standards. The defensive support staff is excellent, very, very good, and that's not a surprise. They are below Oregon and above Michigan State, sort of as a coaching staff at large. That's about where we would place their staff grade. Right below Oregon, right above Michigan State. Michigan State's not going to win many games this year. Michigan State's got a pretty good coaching staff that no one knows about. So that's what the model thinks about Penn State's coaching staff. Notice no one said the word elite. No one said the word great. No one said the word top five. And yet if they go 10-2 this year, people will call them overrated. The schedule sets up very well. It's very favorable. Now, don't overlook week one. Week one, no one's talking about it outside of these fan bases. Penn State at West Virginia has Rock Fight written all over it. When you got a new coordinator and you're trying to fit many new pieces in, and meanwhile Neil Brown's up there no longer on the hot seat and he's got his quarterback back, it could be a very, very challenging week one game. I want to say Penn State's favored by like 9 or 10 right now, but they only play 2 teams in the top 25. And Ohio State's at home. Look at the last month of their season. Washington, at Purdue, at Minnesota, Maryland. My thinking on Penn State is somewhere in October, their offense will hit its stride, and it will level up. It will not be out of the gate, but at some point it'll level up, and you'll find yourself in early November saying, wow, this looks like a really different team. And if that's the case, they're going to get fat on the last 4 weeks of their schedule, and they're going to have momentum on their side, and they'll get in the playoff if that happens. They have a huge bye edge in that Wisconsin game. They go to Southern Cal, then they got a bye week. So they're fully rested. They go to Madison. Wisconsin is off back-to-back road games, no bye. They go to Rutgers, which is in New Jersey. The next week they go to Washington, which is in Seattle. And then they complete a back-to-back road with a cross-country leg. And then they got Penn State at home, no rest. Penn State's fully rested. So the best case scenario for Penn State this year is an undefeated season. And I'm going to tell you why. Because there are no huge underdog spots on here. They've got Ohio State at home. We've got the number on the game. You can go bet it right now. Ohio State's favored by 3.5 in Happy Valley. They go to Southern Cal. Penn State will either be favored or a very small underdog. There is certainly a path for them to win every one of these games. I've got their worst case scenario at 8-4, and I've got them going 10-2. I flirted with 11-1. I've got them going 10-2 this year. JP polls really, really high on Penn State, higher than I'd probably have them. Penn State is 6th in the JP poll in the preseason. That's the difference in a power rating and a ranking, because I'd probably rank them a couple of spots lower. 10-2, 10-2. Does that get you to Indy? If it doesn't, does it get you in the playoff? I think they're going to be a playoff team. I think Penn State will be in the playoff. If you disagree with me, though, certainly you can shout in the comments. But what you really could do is you go over to FanDuel and bet no on Penn State to make the playoffs. And if they don't make it, you'll make yourself some money, because that is one of many offerings they have over there. You can go bet that game I just talked about. Ohio State at Penn State. If you think Ohio State's going to roll them, go lay 3.5. I'm not kidding you. You can do it right now. It's a futures bet. You can do it right now. If you think Penn State is going to fall to West Virginia in week 1, I've got great news for you. You can go find West Virginia, and they'll give you some points. So not only do they pull the upset, you actually got some points. You got some cushion. You can do all of this at FanDuel. If you're listening to me and saying, I'm not betting any of my money on sports, but I'm interested in these numbers you speak of, you can go to FanDuel as well. They don't charge you a dime to look. FanDuel is the exclusive odds provider of our show. We appreciate them. A lot of fun. We will have an announcement in conjunction with that very shortly, because you know, my phone says it's Tuesday right now. That means week 1 is about 11 days away, which means the Friday night before week 1 is about 10 days away, which means Friday Night Lines is nearly upon us. I didn't mean to say lights. Yes, you heard me right. I meant to say lines. Many of you are new around here, but many, many more of you are veterans around here. You know about Friday Night Lines. If you don't, I will let you know in due time. Friday Night Lines is just between us. Management is not involved. We kind of do it on our own accord. It's not on this platform. It's on Instagram Live. You need to be following over there at Late Kick Josh. It's late on a Friday night. It's gritty. It's dirty. It's from some random hotel room. It's great. It's one of the most fun things we do. All right, let's wrap up the show with this. Bold predictions. So bold, but yet not bold enough that you wouldn't bet your money on. You guys claim you've bet your own money on these. Scouts Honor. We work on the honor system around here. First up, this is from Omar in Billings, Montana. He says the Big Ten will get twice as many playoff bids as the ACC and the Big 12 combined. This is a 9.25 for me. So think about what he said. The Big Ten going to get twice as many playoff spots as the Big 12 and the ACC. Okay, so the Big Ten needs at least 4 just out of the gate, because we know that the ACC and Big 12 are going to have 2 combined, because one of them each has to get in. So if they get their minimum, you got to have at least 4. All right, that's already a tall order. If they get even 1 at-large team, like if the ACC or the Big 12 gets even 1 more team in there, it's over. Because at that point, you would need 6 teams in the college football playoff. And if you just do the math there, if they had 3 in and you had 6 in, and we know the G5 gets 1 in, that's 10. The SEC gets 1 in, that's 11. The Big Ten gets 1 in, that's 12. In that world, the Big Ten and the SEC got 1 team in. So obviously that's not happening. So the only path here, as I see it, is the ACC and the Big 12 just get their conference champ in, and that's it. And then you've got to get 4 in. I don't think that's going to happen. I think these conferences will get more than 2 combined teams in. I don't know if I've got 4 big – I don't think I got 4 Big Ten teams going regardless. So I'm going to put – you know what? That's bolder, Jesse. I think it's a 9.75. I'm putting a 9.75 on it. 9.75. I upped it by a half a point right here on air. It's the magic of live internet. Next up, Todd in Elfers, Florida. FSU, Clemson, and Miami will combine to lose 10 games or more in the regular season. Well, I don't think they will. So this is a 9.5 on the boldness scale. FSU and Miami's win totals are 9.5. Clemson's is 8.5. So if they hit their unders, if all 3 of them hit their unders, if FSU and Miami are 9-3, it doesn't even have to be worse than that. If they're 9-3, if Clemson's 8-4, well, there you go. You hit your bet. They lost 10 or more games combined. But here's your problem. One of these teams is going to have a really good year. One of them is going to go 11-1. Someone's going to pop an 11-win season on us, and forget about it if someone goes undefeated. So they face each other too. So like someone's got to win that Florida State-Clemson game. Someone's got to win the FSU-Miami game. Maybe the same team wins both of those games. And at that point, like if Florida State beats Clemson and Miami, who beats Florida State? Notre Dame? Like who's going to beat them? So at that point, I think you see that this is tough to see through. 9.5 on the boldness scale for me. Third, this is getting up there. Carolina man from Newberry, South Carolina. Lenora Sellers will be a Heisman contender in 2024. Now look, here's the thing. I mean, what do we mean when we say contender? We got to say finalist. We can't be saying contender. Contender is so nebulous. Lenora Sellers was announced as the starting quarterback, by the way, at South Carolina today. And so we were up there in spring, and we toured the facility with Shane Beamer, and we were in the weight room, and they're working out, and they're out there practicing in spring ball. We knew, look, there's evidence. There's me walking with Shane Beamer, and you're just going to have to take our word for it, but we have the quote bubble, and I'm telling him now it's going to be Lenora Sellers. And sure enough, he announces Lenora Sellers as his quarterback today. That wasn't much of a mystery. But this dude being a Heisman contender this year, he's a talented player. But man, is their offensive line going to be any better? Is their ground game going to be there? Is the wide receiver room enough? Their over-under win total is 5.5, by the way. They got to go over by like 3 games minimum. And everything's got to stand out. And he's a first-year starter. So as much as I believe in him, he's plus 20,000 odds to win the Heisman for a reason. I don't know that Lenora Sellers is in the Heisman conversation this year, so that's a 9.75 on the boldness scale. And I own stock in him, and I'm still putting a 9.75. Lastly, this would just blow the tops off of some of your heads. Drew from Severna Park, Maryland. A 4-loss team finds their way into the playoff. In the words of Nick Saban, is this what we want college football to be? The answer for most of you is no. This is unlikely. It is not totally impossible. So the way I see it is we can already shave out like 90% of teams. Most teams can't even afford to lose 3 games and make the playoff. It's likely nobody can lose 4 and make it, but if we humor ourselves, if it's a chaotic year in college football, so we're looking at that 10 or 11 seed and we're just having to pick out of the scrap heap, if you're an SEC team that had a ridiculously tough schedule, but you're like in the 10 to 20 range in power rating, so you had a tough schedule, but you were probably, good enough to play competitively and lose some close games. So like you're still up there, you're rated and you're ranked high enough. You got 4 losses. Florida, would be one of these teams. Georgia has that kind of schedule, but Georgia's probably not losing 4 games. So really quickly, Bama is a team who would be ranked high enough and have enough tough games where if they lost 4 of them, there's this really outside shot that have some conversation. LSU, I don't think there's any Big Ten team whose schedule is reputable enough to where if they lost 4, there'd still be enough meat on the scheduling bone. Now, Florida's probably not going to get to 8 wins, but Florida's probably that team where if they got to 8 wins and they had 4 losses by a combined 14 points and it's to a bunch of top 5 or 10 teams, I could see the argument. I don't think this is going to happen, though, so it's probably a moot point. So I'm going to make it a 9.75 on the boldness scale. All right, that's all I got in front of me. Now, remember to do me a couple of favors. Please like the video if you're watching on YouTube. And no matter where you're watching or listening, subscribe to the show. And here's the most important part. Then look around you. You could be watching with your girlfriend. You could be, working the late shift at JCPenney. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know how you live your life. Find some phones. And while they're not looking, just subscribe on those as well. Find your friends around you. Most of them like college football. If they're not subscribed, have them subscribe. This is your due diligence for the day. This is the duty in exchange for the show being free. Appreciate you guys. You're already doing this. I just ask that you continue to do it. For producer Jesse, for director Colin, I'm Josh Pate. Take care. Have a great start. Well, actually, no, it's not Thursday. It's Tuesday. We'll be back here Thursday night. So for the next 48 hours, take care. We'll see you back here Thursday night. Until then, God bless.